I got a couple of questions for you.
Sure thing.
For you being an aerospace engineer.
Mm-hmm.
First off, how'd you end up getting to be an aerospace engineer?
I've been interested in space since I was 6 years old. I always refer to myself as a space cadet. When I was in first grade, I read these serialized books that were about a boy and his dog exploring the moon. And for whatever reason, they always interested me. And I was also fortunate enough to grow up during the Apollo missions to the moon.
Nice.
I'm probably the last generation that remembers watching Neil Armstrong walk on the moon. My elementary school teachers knew that if there was a lunar EVA being televised, I was not going to be in school that day. I also had another inspiration in that I'm originally from Scranton, Pennsylvania, which is in northeastern Pennsylvania. One of the Apollo flight directors, his name was Glenn Lunny, was born about 3 miles from where I lived. And from the time I was in about 5th grade through college, I used to correspond with him. He would always respond to my letters. He would send me information sheets, lithographs, all sorts of things. I still have all of the things that he sent me. When I was in college, he sent me information on the space shuttle that I used to do my senior thesis in college. So I had that inroad as well. So when I went to college, I studied aerospace engineering. I went to Penn State. My senior year, I interviewed for a position out here. That was in February of 1983. They offered me the job and I accepted it in March of 1983. I started working at the center on June 26, 1983. So I've been there just over 40 and a half years. I'm probably going to retire at the end of this year.
All right. I mean, that one answer probably answered like 4 or 5 of my other questions.
Well, there you go. Economy of scale.
Nice. What's your overall mood as you work?
Being an engineer is months of boredom that can be followed by hours of sheer terror. You're doing meetings, you're doing documentation, you're doing analyses, etc. Until then you're actually supporting a mission. And if you've done things right, if you've scoped things correctly, if you've done your off-nominal analyses, if something goes wrong, and everything goes right, it should be a letdown, because you will have had nothing to do. And fortunately, we've been that. I worked on a communication satellite that we launched on the shuttle in 1993. The center here in Cleveland used to manage the Atlas and Titan Centaur launch vehicles for the agency. We were the ones who launched, the Pioneer probes, the Voyager spacecraft, Mars landers. But then all that work was transferred to the Kennedy Space Center in the late 1990s. But I was ascent trajectory lead for 2 weather satellites that we launched for NOAA on Atlas Centaur launch vehicles. And then I worked on 9 pieces of hardware for the space station. And when we're done here, I can actually show you one of those pieces of hardware because we got it back.
Nice.
It was outside on station for about 6 years. And when its job was done, 6 of the 8 pieces they brought back on the shuttle, basically in the garbage. And we got them back because we wanted to look at how the exposure to the space environment was for those 6 years. So I have one of them that I use for public outreach. So nice. Yeah, I can show you that.
Nice, I'm pretty interested in seeing that. All right, next question is, how did this affect your personal life?
You have to strike a balance between your personal life and a career. What is your focus going to be? always tried to keep the two together. A lot of people just focus on their careers. Their personal lives suffer. I've seen that. You just have to decide what your priority is, not what other people think your priorities should be. It's important to keep your focus as to what's important to you, what you want to do, where your focus lies, what your goals are, and choose your career path accordingly.
All right. Did you feel comfortable while having this job? Usually?
Yeah, there are times I felt comfortable. There are times I felt horribly uncomfortable, for lots of different reasons. Technically, politically, the biggest problems that you run into tend to be political in nature, not technical. And those are always the hardest ones to overcome. Being an engineer, when you go to school, whether it's high school, whether it's college, the way I put it, what you're learning is tools that you're putting in a toolbox. The problem is you're not taught how to apply those tools, and then what other tools you might need. That's up to you to do. You can technical classes, mathematics, physics, whatever. I mean, I can go and look up an equation if I don't remember what it is. But the most important things are learning to communicate verbally and in writing, and being able to relate to people. Because you work with people of all across the country, across the world. You will have to work with people that on a personal level you don't like at all. But you're there to do a job, so you have to do it. You could be the greatest engineer in the world, but if you can't communicate what you're doing, writing or verbally, you're useless. Honestly, those skills, I honestly say, are more important than the technical skills. Take classes in writing, take classes in public speaking. Learn to be comfortable talking to somebody like we're doing, or standing in front of an audience of 500 people, because you may have to do that. I do it. I do it a lot. I get very nervous until I start, and then you get into a groove, you get into a pattern, and the trepidation tends to go away. It's harder actually to deal one-on-one with somebody than it is with a large group.
I know how that feels, considering I've presented at least 20 projects so far this school year.
Oh, there you go. Yeah, you got it.
All right. How long has it been since you began having an interest in aerospace engineering?
Again, I'm doing the job I wanted to do since I was 6 years old. I've been at the center here over 40 years, but I always update my resume. And if you look at the different jobs I've had at the center here in that time frame, my resume is like 17 pages long with the different projects I've worked, different things I've done. I'm also, with getting ready to retire, I've also set myself up as my own company, Space Systems Consulting, LLC. And I'm also part of Black River Astronomical Society. I'm a board member at the society here.
Nice.
Matter of fact, they have a monthly meeting coming up next Wednesday. So if you have any interest in astronomy, come on out to the Carlisle Visitor Center. 7 o'clock next Wednesday. And
Nice.
weather permitting, because they have an observatory at the Equestrian Center, the Nielsen Observatory. Weather permitting, Friday night is a public observing night. If the weather isn't good, they'll shift it to Saturday. And if the weather isn't good, it'll be next month. Typically, the weather's pretty lousy, as you can imagine, in January, February. So it's hard to get those nights in. But they try it. They try.
Yeah, it's on and off.
Oh, yeah.
From time to time.
Yeah.
What was your most fond memory of working?
Oh gosh. I've gotten to work with a lot of representatives from the astronaut office, because of hardware that we did for shuttle and on space station. when I did the weather satellites for NOAA, I was working with, the center here with our launch vehicle contractor. I was working with the Goddard Space Flight Center, who was actually building the spacecraft for NOAA. I should say overseeing the build and doing the mission operations for NOAA. So also working with NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. And they had a contractor that was building the spacecraft. So it was just huge cadre of people. But we managed to all work very, very well together. We were a very cohesive team. That's actually hard to come by. I hate to say it, but in the 40 plus years I've worked for NASA, that has been the only project I ever worked where I could say that we worked that way, the way we were supposed to. Companies are out to maximize profit. NASA has always worked through companies. People ask me about commercial space. How do you feel about, the commercial space doing this? It's like everything NASA's ever done has been built by contractors. NASA deals with them. It's just now, they have the smarts where we're going to say, we're not going to look over your shoulder. You let us know when you're ready. We're going to review what you've done. If we don't like it, we're going to tell you, but, we're not riding herd every single step of the way. In launch vehicles today, NASA buys a launch service, not a launch vehicle. When we were doing the launches, we were following a specific vehicle for a mission. Now we're buying a launch service. If the launch provider wants to switch launch vehicles coming out of the factory, they can do that. But that's not how it used to be before. So things have changed. Some for the better, some not for the better. But there's nothing is black and white. Nothing is good and bad. It's always some combination of both. You just have to deal with it.
Yeah. All right. Next up, what was your schedule for like a usual day on the job?
Well, like today, I've been writing a couple documents, a couple presentations I had to do. I had 3 meetings that I was in. I have days where there's nothing but back to back to back to back meetings. I have days where I can actually get some work done. And when if you're supporting a mission, you're doing the documentation for that mission, you're doing the reviews that you need to do. And, as I said, if you've done your job right and everything is nominal, then you really have nothing to do because you've planned for it. Even if something goes wrong, you look at where are the likely failures and you plan for those. So if that does materialize, you already know what to do. That doesn't always happen either. But you do what you can do in the time that you have and the money you have to do it. That's another thing with being an engineer. You're not just doing technical work. When you're working on a project, it's technical, it's cost, and it's schedule. The best way to do something, you might not be able to afford, or it takes too long to do it. There's a saying that says, better is the enemy of good enough. So that it can be sometimes a hard pill to swallow, but you have to look at what can I do that's going to meet the technical goals within the cost budget I have and the schedule I have to do it in. All 3 of those things come into play. So the problems usually end up in the cost and the schedule. The technical ones usually are the easier ones to solve. So if you're going to be an engineer, learn about budgeting, learn about how to do scheduling as well. I never learned any of those things until I started to work. When I started to work at the center, I was thrown in with evaluating a proposal and leading part of it. It's like, I've only been here 2 years. What are you doing? But you do what you need to do. The opportunities are there, depending on what you want to do. When you look at NASA, there's 10 NASA centers across the country. Plus you have supporting organizations like the Jet Propulsion Laboratory in California. Most people think they're a NASA center. They are not. They're part of the California Institute of Technology, Caltech. They always have been. They work under contract to NASA. Johns Hopkins University in Maryland, their Applied Physics Lab, same thing. They manage the Pluto New Horizons mission for NASA, and several other missions. Right now, the Parker Solar Probe, and one last year, the DART mission that was used to slam into an asteroid to see if it could deflect its orbit. Those were all done at APL. So there's lots of opportunities out there. Again, it depends what you want to do, what your goals are. You match those with where's the best place to go. The advantage of working for the government is that if you're a civil servant like I am, when you finish on one project, you get assigned to another. And you pick another one where you want to go. You can transfer between projects too. If you work for a company and a project ends, you can be laid off or fired. There were contractors that worked on the space shuttle program for 30 years. When the last space shuttle lifted off, they were given their pink slips. They lost their jobs. But that doesn't happen in the federal government. So the only way that you could lose your job in the federal government is if Congress initiates something called a reduction in force. The last time that happened was 1972. So there's job security.
Great. Right. What were some of your most favorite parts of working as an aerospace engineer?
A lot of the people I've met, a lot of people I've been able to work with. There's always good. You always develop a rapport with a lot of people. I'm working with a group now that we work together very well. We have a lot of problems that we deal with, and it's much better to work as a group because no one person can think of everything. You get a much better product when you work as a team, and anything that's done in space, you're working as a team, and that's why you have to be able to work with all sorts of people, all different ages, all different personalities, all different backgrounds. I will always remember I'd been working at the center here less than a year, and I made my first phone call to our upper stage project office that was at the Marshall Space Flight Center in Huntsville, Alabama. Because, I'm from northeastern Pennsylvania. The only thing I know about southern accents is from listening to television shows. And I always remember that when the secretary there answered the phone, all I heard was, "Pam, Office Betty speaking." And I almost just started laughing on the phone, but you got used to it, When you're working with people at the Johnson Space Center whose background is Korean, yet they have a southern accent and say y'all a lot, it's like, really? South Korea, right? But, you do work with a lot of people, a lot of different viewpoints, a lot of personalities. You have to learn how to stay flexible and work with people. I use humor a lot, as you can probably tell, and it helps if you're in a tense situation. It can help diffuse, the tenseness. So again, it's learning about people, social skills. The social skills, the communications, I honestly think those are as or more important than the technical skills. At least as important. Because without them, you can't do your job. You can't do it.
What were some of your least favorite parts of this job?
Dealing with politics. Dealing with people who are only interested in the politics, who could care less about the technical schedule or cost aspects of what you're doing. You get a lot of those. And again, you have a choice. You deal with them. I see a lot of people who just say, "All right, just tell me what you want me to do, and I'll do it." Okay, if that's what you choose to do, that's up to you. But again, what's your focus? What do you consider to be important? I have stood in front of my supervisors and literally told them, take this job and shove it. I am not doing it anymore. And here's the reasons why. Find somebody else. I've caused issues that actually went to the center director. Um, it depends on you and what your focus is, what you consider to be important, your own ethical balance. The worst thing you could ever do is let somebody decide what your career is or what your focus should be, because that's just giving up yourself. It's hard to do. It's hard. Believe me, it's hard to stick up for yourself. But remember the words of William Shakespeare: "This above all, to thine own self be true." And really, when you get right down to it, the only person you need to answer to in your life is the person looking back at you in the mirror. That's it. That's the only person you need to be accountable for. If you can do that, if you know what you're doing, why you're doing it, no one else may agree with you. Everybody else may think you're crazy. But if you know what you're doing and why, and you can honestly look at yourself and say that, that's all you need. That's all you need. It's hard to do. It's hard to do, but it is what needs to be done. Yeah.
Wow. What were some easy parts of your job?
I enjoy doing. I've been doing public outreach for a lot of years. I mean, kindergarten to public audiences. I have a couple coming up next month. One for Black River, two for NASA. And, you know, when you're dealing day to day with the hassles of the politics and the problems, and then I go out and talk to a school about, basically I'm doing what got me interested to begin with. So it's like, it reminds me of why I'm doing what I'm doing and why I put up with it for 40 years. You know, there are many times, honest, I haven't told many people this, I'm walking down where I'm a big Star Trek fan, and I remind myself of what my focus is, and I'm going off to yet another meeting or some other garbage is hitting the fan. And I have literally said to myself as I'm walking down the halls, I am walking the corridors of the Starship Enterprise, because that is our future. It has to be. You know, this planet is a finite resource. No matter how well we conserve, we will end up using the natural resources of this planet. And we're a target against all the asteroids, comet fragments that are out there. You know, it is not a question of if an asteroid fragment will impact the Earth. It is a question of when it will happen. So 11 years ago, there was a relatively small asteroid fragment that exploded over Russia. When I say small, it was about the size of a house. They estimate it was about 60 tons. It exploded about 60,000 feet up, but the force of the explosion damaged buildings and injured over 1,200 people on the ground because of secondary debris and such. If something like that happened over New York City, Los Angeles, London, Tokyo, it could be devastating. It doesn't have to hit the ground. There was last week a small asteroid entered, was undetected until I think about half an hour before it entered its atmosphere over Germany, and actually recovered pieces of it on the ground. It's the debris left over from the formation of the solar system, and you know, there are impact records all over the Earth. All we have to do is look at the surface of the moon, look at the surface of Mercury, look at the surface of Mars, littered with craters. There's impact craters all over the Earth. We don't tend to see them because we have an atmosphere and weather, and they've been eroded, but they're there. It's not a question of if it's going to happen, it's a question of when. So getting human beings off this planet is a way of helping to ensure the survival of the human species. It sounds like science fiction. It used to be science fiction. It's not anymore. That's one of the purposes of the Artemis program that NASA is now pursuing, and returning to the lunar surface, learning to live there. It'll be a test bed for what we need to do on Mars to extend ourselves there and just continue moving outward. Just like when settlers moved from the crowded eastern seaboard of the United States out west. There was a time when Ohio here was the West. It was wilderness. Most of the people who moved west never made it. They died from disease, hunger, starvation. They were killed, but people kept moving outward. The next step is moving outward. That outward is that way. The moon, we lived off the land. The moon and Mars have the most important resource that we need, and that's water. Because in both cases, there's water frozen as ice into the soils. We need water to survive. We can separate water into oxygen and hydrogen. We need oxygen to survive. And oh, by the way, oxygen and hydrogen make the best rocket propellants. So it's all there. It's just waiting for us. Nice. We just have to. I hate to say it, but I think for most people to realize the importance of what NASA does, it's going to take an asteroid fragment taking out a population center on this planet for people to really realize it. It's unfortunate. Most people don't realize the technology that's come from the space program that we tend to take for granted. If NASA had never existed, you wouldn't have this. You wouldn't be holding that cell phone.
Wow. Because
the driver for, computers were the size of this room. There's reason, computer, like a virus or something, used to be called a computer bug. The reason for that is because cockroaches used to get into the computers. Literally. The driving need for a small computer was for the Gemini space program, for controlling the spacecraft. That cell phone you're holding has thousands of times the computing capability of the computer that landed astronauts on the moon in the Apollo program. That computer was a 12-bit computer. Not bytes, not megabytes, not gigabytes. 12-bit computer. So many, like, you watch the weather reports on the news and you watch the satellite imagery. No NASA, you wouldn't have that. The smoke detectors, CO detectors that we have now, those were actually developed for the Skylab program in the 70s. UPC codes at the stores, that was developed for NASA so we could make sure we had good inventory control of everything that was going to the space station. Because you got to know what's up there and you got to know what's coming back, because you have to plan for mass accordingly. That's why those were invented. And now you're going to have the next generation of those, which are called RFID chips. The UPC codes will be gone. So you'll have your shopping cart filled up with things that have RFID chips. You'll go through this magnetic arch. It'll total up everything in the cart. You pay for it, and that's it. Mm. And actually, do you have an Ohio Easy Pass? Mm-mm. No? For the Turnpike? Those are RFID chips.
Oh, okay.
There's people wonder why you don't have to replace the batteries in those, because there aren't any. Oh. When you pass under those arches, there's a radio signal comes out. It's picked up by that unit, and the energy of that radio signal charges a capacitor, which then issues a signal back out that tells what car just went through. So it doesn't need a battery. All right. It's all part of the RF transmission.
That's cool.
See, there's advantages to being a geek. I always tell people that being a geek is the greatest thing you could be. Because if you're a geek, odds are pretty good that your career will never involve the words, "Do you want fries with that?"
What are some of the most challenging parts that you have to face as being an aerospace engineer?
Dealing with the politics. Always dealing. I'm dealing with it right now. We have some major issues on the project that I'm working, and they're all political. And we just got to keep pushing. You just got to keep pushing. Yeah.
Now, how easy is it to actually make a living off of this career?
When I started 40 years ago, coming out of college with a bachelor's degree, you typically start as the pay scale is called the general schedule, and it goes from GS1 to GS15. And within each of those, there are 10 steps. If you start with a bachelor's degree in engineering, you typically start as a GS7, step 1. When I started, that salary was $21,500 a year. That salary today is almost $50,000 a year. It's more than doubled. Let's hear it for inflation.
Yeah. Right.
So I started at a GS7, step 1. The highest you can go is a GS15, step 10. I'm a GS14, step 10. So with the cost of living increase we just got, my gross salary is about $165,000 a year.
Wow.
And the government pays a large portion of your health insurance, contributes to your retirement, contributes to life insurance, contributes to your Medicare. You don't see that money, but it's there for you. So if you add that to your, like to my salary, that adds like almost $20,000 a year to my salary. So, I mean, gross. I mean, that's before withholding, before taxes, everything. If you add that in, that's like $185,000 a year.
That's a lot of money.
You can make higher salaries working in industry. But remember, in industry, you can be fired. And in industry, you don't really get a choice as to what job you're going to do. You're told you're doing this job because the company's got to make money. That's their primary purpose for existence. There's nothing wrong with that. It's the way it is. But that's not NASA's purpose. So there's distinct advantages to working. And plus, you earn vacation time and you also earn sick leave separate from your vacation time. And depending on how long you've been there, it tells you how much you earn. Once you've been there, I've forgotten now whether it's 10 or 15 years, you earn, for every 2 weeks, you earn like a day of vacation time. I could take off almost 2 months and get paid for it, vacation. Yeah,
Oh my
and that doesn't
goodness.
even, and sick leave you can accumulate. I know people who have thousands of sick hours. They have a medical problem, they're covered. And if that's there when you retire, you get the equivalent of that money in a lump sum payment. So there's advantages. There's advantages.
I've heard that it gets really competitive in that field, but how competitive is it truly?
Oh, very. Yeah, very. Again, and if I'm looking for a different position, I have to interview for it. Matter of fact, I just interviewed for one last week. So, again, keeping your resume, keeping your skills up to date, being able to communicate, particularly in an interview, because you're going to be asked questions, and you're not going to be given those questions ahead of time. So, you got to be able to think on your feet. And it's okay to say you don't know if you don't know. Don't give a line of BS because people can see through that. Don't be afraid to say you don't know. There's nothing wrong with that. It shows that you're not only willing to admit it, but you're also willing to learn about what you don't know as well.
All right.
Learning never stops, I can tell you that. I've taken more courses since I worked in NASA than I ever took in college. I learned more about trajectory analysis after 6 months in one group I was in than I learned at 2 years of college.
Wow. Another thing, how can you be flexible with your schedule?
Again, I'm working for the government. I can basically go into the office and leave the office whenever I want, as long as I work 8 hours. And I can work in the office or I can work from home, or some combination thereof. As long as I work 8 hours, that's it.
Nice.
Yeah.
All right. On the job, what types of machinery do you work with to achieve the operations that is needed?
Mostly on a day-to-day basis, I'm working out with what you're doing right now. I got a laptop, which I've got on a docking station hooked up at my desk. That's mostly what I work with. You know, if we're in the lab, of course, you're doing a test somewhere, then you have the facility equipment. Um, the missions I worked, you know, you're at a communications console, and so you can, you know, talk to whoever you need to on the voice loops. But unless you are working in a lab environment, you're typically sitting behind a desk with a computer.
All right. What did you know about this job before actually going to college?
So I've been following NASA from the time I was a kid, you know, to when I started. You know, you learn more about the job, and that, of course, once you actually start working. Like, you know, I don't think I ever realized before I started, you know, that there were 10 NASA centers, that many. So you learn as you go on. You know, NASA is an old agency. It was formed in 1958. It's a Cold War holdover. In many respects, it needs to be completely revamped, if not done away with completely in a new agency form, because things have changed very much over the last decades.
Yeah, definitely.
And sometimes the way we work it's too archaic. It is too archaic. But with anything, you know, there are nuances in any job, any place you go to that you're going to only learn by actually being there. You know, you learn as much as you can ahead of time, prepare yourself as much as possible, but you still got to stay flexible because there's always going to be changes. There's always going to be something you're going to like, really? It works that way? So, yeah. It's like, I know when I first started, I wasn't really prepared for all the political, you know, the cost and schedule things. It's like, wait a minute, I studied to be an engineer. What am I doing this for? Well, it is part of being an engineer. You know, they don't tell you that in college. Maybe they do now. I don't know. Maybe they do now. I know there are more opportunities for students in college now to actually work on spaceflight programs. You know, with the advent of CubeSats and such. So there's a much more available experience base available to students today than there was when I went to college. You know, when I went to college, there were no desktop computers. There were no laptop computers. They didn't exist. There was no internet. We had rooms of drafting tables and drafting equipment, which I still have and still use. Today it's all computer terminals and computer-aided design. You mentioned drafting. Most will ask, what is that? It's what you're doing electronically that used to be done by hand. You know, we went to the moon with slide rules and drafting tables. You know, right now, at this very minute, this country does not have the capability to land a human on the moon. We do not have the capability to do that right now. We will, but we do not have it right now. In fact, there is no country on this planet that can send a human being to land on the moon right now.
It's weird to think, considering it happened like over 60 years, almost 60 years ago.
Well, there's a lot of reasons for it. Majority of them are political, and in many respects have held NASA back over the years. But you have to learn how to deal with it and sometimes work around it as best you can. You get creative.
Now, when did you start actually preparing for this job?
Well, just college, and that, I mean, in preparing for the job, it was on the job. You know, again, you're given these tools in a toolbox when you're coming out of college. You got to learn how to apply them, and then you need to learn what other tools you need. And again, with NASA, you can take courses. You know, you get a bachelor's degree. NASA will pay for you to get an advanced degree. You just have to agree to work for NASA for a certain amount of time. Whether it's a master's degree, a doctorate, whatever, NASA will pay for it. You just got to agree to work for them for a certain amount of time. But it all depends on what you want to do. I only have a bachelor's degree because I like to do a lot of different things. The higher the degree, the more you specialize. You know, I work with a husband and wife who are both physicists. They both have their doctorates, and they work on one set of things, and that's it. You know, like I said, my resume is like 17 pages of different things I've done. So, I'll give you a copy of this. Like I said, I'm Space Systems Consulting. I did like a summary of it, so I'll give you a copy so you can see some of the things that I've done.
All right.
There's also some links on there to public outreach I've done that the videos are actually on YouTube, so they're on there.
Interesting. Now, what college did you go to for this?
Penn State. Penn State, yeah. Penn State has branch campuses across Pennsylvania, so I did 2 years at the campus that was actually near Scranton, where I was born and raised, and then 2 years at the main campus, which is State College, University Park. And then I started working here. So yeah, I've been out here since June of 1983.
Nice. You've been here longer since my mom. You've been here longer than my mom's been born.
Yeah, I guarantee I've got socks older than you are. Yeah. I may have socks older than you are. But yeah, are there things I would have done differently? Yeah. But you know, I tell my daughter this, that the two worst words in the English language are "if only." You know, if you ever find yourself saying, "Boy, if only I did this," or "if only I'd done that," don't put yourself in that position. If you start thinking that, and there's something you want to do, or should do, or feel should be done, do it. It doesn't matter what level it's at, whether it's professionally or personally. Just do it. Just do it. Again, it doesn't matter whether anybody else understands it or not. If it's important to you, then that's what makes it important, and just do it.
Nice. All right, and now here's the last question.
Okay.
Are there any possible tips that you can give me if I wanted to be an aerospace engineer?
Is that what interests you?
Yeah, it fits me pretty well.
Where would you say your interests are? What are the things you enjoy doing the most, reading the most, pursuing the most?
Like roller coasters, and engineering.
Mm-hmm.
Have you heard of Mark Rober?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, I've heard he used to work at NASA. And now he does a lot of crazy things with his nieces and nephews.
It sounds like you might be like mechanical engineering, which is great. You know, focus on what's important to you, and then choose a career that matches those interests. You know, it's the difference between a job and a career. A job is something you have to do because you need to make money to survive. A career is something that you really like to do and you just happen to get paid for it as well. So let your interests, where your natural tendencies take you, determine what your career is going to be. Because that means then you'll have a career and not a job. And don't be afraid you're in one place and maybe the opportunities that you want aren't there. go somewhere else. It could be within, like NASA, for instance. It could be within the center. It could be going to another NASA center. I know people have left NASA and have gone to work commercially, or they've gone to teach at college, too. Again, it's what's important to you. Where do your interests lie? That's the most important thing.
All right. Thanks for letting me have an interview with you
Oh, you're welcome.
about aerospace engineering.
You're welcome. You're welcome. I'm glad you have the interest. I'm glad you have the STEM interest. And if you've already worked 20 projects already, it's like you're on the right track. So yeah, good luck.
Nice.
All right.